Welcome. Thanks for joining our Leaders in Literacy webinar by Lindamood-Bell. My name is Dave Kivita. I'm the Director of Development of Lindamood-Bell for Schools. And this is another in our series of Leaders in Literacy webinars, which you can find on our website if you wanted to take a look at some of our previous webinars that we've had with other leaders in literacy. And there'll be information about how you can also find some podcasts that we've done as well on the Lindamood-Bell podcast station. I am joined today by Cathey Ford, who's the Dyslexia Coordinator for Fort Smith Public Schools in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Welcome, Cathey. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And initially, we had put together a presentation that we were going to deliver at the ASCD Empower 20 conference in Los Angeles, which was actually, scheduled to take place a month ago. But obviously, like so many other things, got canceled in the wake of everything that's going on. And the fact that it was only a month ago, Cathey, is amazing to me. It's been an incredibly long month.
Incredibly, I agree, 100%.
A million things going on. So our idea initially was to kind of do the presentation that we were going to do as a webinar and let folks take a look at it that way. But we also thought, there have been so many things happening in schools across the country and so much that's happened in Fort Smith to try to respond to the fact that all of a sudden we've got a distance learning situation, that it would be great to talk about that today and kind of weave that into our discussion. So the things that we're going to talk about today will be a bit about Fort Smith's current distance learning model and what the district has done initially to respond to the situation. And then we'll talk a bit about what the implementation of Lindamood-Bell has looked like in Fort Smith for the past 3 years, what some of the adaptations over time have been as they've begun implementing, and we'll take a look at a little bit of the data from that implementation. And then we'll wrap up by talking a little bit about Cathey, I think kind of your and the district's vision of where we can go with some of the distance learning and what that needs to look like. And we can talk about some of those pieces in a little bit more detail. All right, so that's where we're going to head to. Cathey, do you want to talk for a minute just a little bit about what some of the challenges are that you all are dealing with as a district?
Well, as a district, the remote learning aspect has certainly been challenging. We knew that we wanted our intervention to continue, wrapping our head around exactly how that was going to look like with our program was a little challenging, to be quite honest with you. We have a very diverse population, and when you think about our instruction and the importance of the questioning and the back and forth between the teacher, it was just a very difficult thing to try to figure out. But definitely, with your all's help, we did manage to come up with a plan, and I feel very good about what we are doing. We certainly did not want to do nothing. That was not an option at all, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's been great leadership from the district to say, even though this is outside of the core curriculum, because this is intervention, that you all wanted to keep the intervention going. I think a lot of districts have really just focused on saying, let's focus on that core instructional programming. And sometimes, in some cases, that means the other pieces, like intervention, have fallen by the wayside. So I think it's great that the district has really focused on that.
Those are our most needy students, and they face enough challenges as it is, and so we just felt like we could not overlook them and just say do nothing. That was never an option.
Yeah, that's great, and I definitely understand your point about the using seeing stars and visualizing and verbalizing. There is so much that is focused on the language and the responding to the student's response, the Socratic interaction that has to happen, the ability to differentiate based on how students are responding, that makes it tough to figure out, well, how do we do that in a couple of different formats, right? One of the things that I've been kind of trying to focus my mind on as we work with different districts is that we don't want to go back to sort of the old school model of a paper packet that is just a list of words, and maybe it's a list of words that every single word has final E on it, and the student's just being asked to read down this list of words. And that, of course, is not the type of instruction that we want to be doing.
Exactly. So that was what was the most challenging part, to come up with an idea of how to keep it engaging and interactive and still address the critical components of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, some of the things that I think have made that transition a little bit easier are that, we can talk about the district overall for a second, and we can come back and talk more in depth about this. But, we've obviously trained the teachers in seeing stars and visualizing and verbalizing, but then have been able to support them through job-embedded professional development that's all been virtual.
Yes.
So all of the teachers that have been trained in Fort Smith have had the opportunity to have a Lindamood-Bell consultant online in their classrooms, working directly with them and their students this entire time. And that means that familiarity with technology, it has been something that teachers have had for a while. So now trying to transition to using that with their students is maybe a little bit easier.
Definitely. I definitely think that's been an advantage on our part. And the kids are used to it too. So our teachers are, when we said, well, we're going to be doing some things through Zooming or through Google Classroom, that was not at all unfamiliar to them, because they have been used to Zooming with our online coaching. The kids are used to having a coach come in and say hi and watch their lessons and interact with that. So the kids are also used to Zooming, and I think that has definitely been a plus. That was just one less challenge that our teachers had to face.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more in detail about the district as a whole. You did mention earlier it's a very diverse district, and it's very diverse in terms of economics, from site to site. It's diverse in terms of the racial makeup, and diverse in terms of the languages that students are speaking. But overall, it's about a district of about 15,000 students, right?
Yes, we have about 15,000 students. We have 19 elementary schools and 4 junior highs and 2 high schools. We also have an alternative learning center that is using the program as well. We are about 72% free and reduced lunch, and the diversity of our population, we have 34 different languages spoken in our district, so that's quite a challenge as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is challenging to meet the needs of everyone.
Yeah, and the group of students that you're primarily focused on working with the teachers is students with characteristics of dyslexia.
Yes, that's true. We do work with, that is the primary focus for the dyslexia interventionists. In addition to that, we work with students who may not show characteristics of dyslexia, but also are struggling with reading for one reason or another. So our dyslexia interventionists focus on kids that are showing characteristics of dyslexia. And then we also have additional staff that works with students that may be a year and a half to 2 years behind, we don't want to leave them behind either.
Yep. Yep. And so a lot of this was based on kind of the dyslexia legislation that the state passed a few years ago. And, we don't need to go into too much of the details of it. I think it's kind of laid out here. Folks are generally relatively familiar. There are some unique aspects, I think, to what you all are doing in Arkansas. Maybe you could talk about sort of I think everybody's familiar with kind of universal screening, but then a little bit about the 10-day intervention cycle and what happens then.
Okay. When our students are given the initial screener, if they don't meet those benchmarks, additional screening is done. It's called a level 1 dyslexia screener. And it is just more diagnostic, and it helps us identify and target exactly where the weak areas are. When we target those areas, every 10 days we progress monitor. And if the students respond, they are for 2 cycles, 10-day cycles, and they're meeting the benchmarks, then they are released from intervention, from that intervention group, and are back with core instruction, or they don't get the additional, they get core instruction. Now, if they still are struggling, then they continue in the intervention groups, and through that progress monitoring, we identify students who possibly need to have an additional level, what's called a level 2 screening, where we use the norm reference testing and look for characteristics of dyslexia. So that's how that cycle works.
Got it. And the state has done a lot in terms of dyslexia awareness training for all teachers, and even setting up what's called RISE, in which they do fairly in-depth training of teachers in terms of awareness of what needs to happen in order for students to become readers, successful readers.
Yes, that's true. All teachers have to attend PD on the characteristics of dyslexia to help them recognize in their classroom when kids are struggling, and bring it to the attention of someone. RISE training, RISE stands for Reading Initiative for Student Excellence, and all K-6 teachers attend 6 days of face-to-face training based on the science of reading, and that's phase 1, and then phase 2 is the actual implementation of the program, and it's tied to their teaching licensure. So with the state initiative, we're seeing change in the core instruction, which is critical. High school teachers and special ed teachers at the secondary level also are attending RISE video trainings. They have 18 hours a year that they attend. So the state is really trying to address the reading struggles that we're seeing. And I know Arkansas is certainly not alone. It's across the nation. And all of this is based on the science of reading. That's the foundation for the program.
Great. So a couple years ago, you all sort of chose Lindamood-Bell as the, and Seeing Stars and Visualizing and Verbalizing as the programs that you wanted to train your teachers in order for them to do intervention. Maybe you can talk a little bit about why you ended up selecting Lindamood-Bell.
All right. This was a huge shift for our teachers and staff, and just across the state in thinking. And so the first challenge was finding a program that we felt would allow us the opportunity to still use our teacher sense of when kids are ready to move. And that was probably the one of the biggest features that appealed to us in the district. We have teachers that were highly trained in reading and teaching reading. And so this is just a different way of looking at it and approaching it. And so with the progress monitoring that we do with Lindamood-Bell, it allows the teachers to move the students through the program when they see that when the evidence shows that the kids are ready to move. And we also can start kids where they are and they don't have to start at square one. And that appealed to us greatly. Our teachers were used to the interaction, the one-on-one responding to what the kids were saying through the programs that we had used. That was not new to them. What was new was how to phrase it and how to word it. That was a challenge. But I think the thing that really appealed to us about Lindamood-Bell was just simply that we use the evidence of what the kids are showing, and our teachers can move the kids as they see when they're ready.
Great. And so we sort of did an initial pilot in which we trained, initially we trained all of the dyslexia interventionists, right? Yes. And then following on that, we decided to implement a little bit of an initial pilot, and we can talk a little bit more about what that decision making was that led to it. I know you had lots of concerns about how many students were potentially going to be labeled as having characteristics of dyslexia. You had a lot of English language learners, and you have that diverse population that we talked about before. And so one of the things that we discussed with you all as a district was to say, we can train the dyslexia interventionists and the special education teachers and make a big impact there with those kids, and that's fantastic. But if we still have lots of kids coming in to intervention, we haven't resolved sort of the core issue. And so one of the things that we discussed early on was training K through 2 teachers across the district, and we did an initial pilot at 11 different schools.
Yes. One of the things when the dyslexia law was passed and we started screening the students to meet the law, we quickly realized, as almost every school district across the state and the country found out that there was a tremendous need, and we had a lot of kids that could not meet the benchmarks, and we knew so that told us our problem was systemic, and we needed to make systemic changes. Once we implemented Lindamood-Bell with the dyslexia interventionists, and we really were impressed by what we were seeing, we decided that why not try it in the classrooms with the classroom teachers? So we asked for volunteers. We just said, who would be interested? And we did. We had 11 schools of K1 and 2 teachers participated in the pilot. I think there were 53, I think, in all. They received the training in seeing stars and visualizing and verbalizing, and the district expectation was that they would do the programs 15 to 20 minutes daily. They received the Lindamood-Bell coaching, just like our dyslexia interventionists and special ed teachers. They received that coaching, and so with that, we put it out in the classrooms.
Great. Yeah. And the results from that initial year, when we looked at the DIBEL scores kind of from mid-year, when we really started working with those teachers, to end-of-year scores, what we saw was a pretty dramatic drop in the number of students who were scoring below benchmark. And so that really kind of energized folks in thinking, hey, if we can make that kind of impact in half a year using this with our students, maybe we could spread this a little bit wider.
Yes, and so we decided to take it, or the district decided to take it district-wide. And again, I can't emphasize enough that we were a comprehensive literacy district and had been comprehensive literacy for years. And so, and I was one of them, I mean, dedicated. This was a huge, huge shift in thinking, because it's a different way of teaching reading. But what we realized is we had been working hard and very hard. Our teachers had been working, extremely hard year after year after year, and we still were not seeing kids where they needed to be. And so we decided we would go district-wide K2 with this implementation. And it was challenging, because it really, it caused teachers to have to step back and really think about what they were doing. And we asked them to make some major changes in their teaching strategies. So, but it has been, while it was challenging, it was the right thing to do. We knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. And so you all trained all of the K-2 teachers across the district, and then all the special educators. And when we looked at the end of that first year, we think about just the students who were getting intervention. We'll take a look at K-2 data in a little bit, but just the students who were receiving intervention, kids got about 63 hours of small group reading intervention, and the students who were doing Seeing Stars, you can sort of see their scores there, but we did see really that cascade effect that we talk a lot about, right? That we want to see the improvement in terms of students reading fluency, but in order to get there, the first thing that needs to move up is their symbol imagery and their word attack. And as that goes up, so will their word recognition, and as that improves, so will their reading accuracy, and as their accuracy improves, their reading comprehension improves, and that helps guide their fluency as well. And it was really neat to see that staggered impact when we took a look at those post-test scores.
Yes, it was very exciting. I love the orange.
That's right. The more orange, the better.
Good. We love the orange. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So on the left there is the pre-test in the light blue, and the post-test in the dark blue. And it's great to see statistically significant gains across all of those areas. More important than the percentiles is to kind of look at standard scores, so we can think about the significance of those changes. And we did really see that students were making very large standard score changes in all of those crucial components of reading.
Yes, we did, indeed.
And that sort of led into, thinking about how we could refine it. That first year we did see, as you've pointed out, Cathey, anytime you've got a new implementation, there are going to be gaps. There was, though on average, the reading intervention students got about 60 hours. There were some sites where they got more, some sites where they got less. Even within groups, there were some changes. And so we really worked hard to identify that at the core, what we needed to help with was in identifying principles as those key components of change. And that if the principal has this as a primary focus, then the other structural changes that need to occur will come along behind that and allow students to get more intervention.
Yes, and that is key. And I think once we had the data and we started seeing the change, data talks. And so it helped with the principal's expectations. And I think that also just realizing that we have to do something. With the RISE initiative, this program supports what RISE is saying that we need to do. It supports the science of reading, and so that certainly has helped. I think, though, that the data talks, and when you see that the changes are being made, now, we're still not where we want to be, but we're moving there, and we have the cascade, as I always say, the cascade's rolling. We're getting there, and so change is happening. It's just that it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not happening as quickly as we want it to happen, but it's happening, and so we have to be patient.
Yep. And so one of the other things that we did was that you all came up with was the idea of doing some intervention during the summer. And focusing in particular on middle school students and rising middle schoolers. And so you all selected a site, and we got 8 groups of students that came 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for a good month. And they were supported, they were pre-tested and post-tested, and the teachers were supported with job-embedded PD. And the great thing was that not only did the kids get multiple hours of instruction per day, but the teachers really got the opportunity to do the steps and then do them again and then do them again and see, in that previous slide, we talked about 60 hours over the course of a school year. These summer school students got to see 60 hours over the course of a month. And so teachers got to see the entire scope and sequence of that program in a very short time. And the changes for the students were really dramatic.
Yes, they were. The summer school experience was just amazing for everyone involved, teachers, students, everyone involved. The kids, I just admired their tenacity because they were in these sessions, 4 50-minute sessions every day. They kept coming. I always say that it was just amazing. I was worried the first day, are they going to show up? The next day, will they come back? And then after the first week, it was like, they're still coming. And it's hard work. It's hard work. They work hard in those sessions, and yet they still kept coming. And when you look at the growth that we had in those 4 short weeks, it was amazing. And the teachers, and I will say this, all of the teachers that taught the first round came back last summer and taught again. And if we're talking about what we're going to do this summer, we were going to have it again this summer. And they were all talking about they want to come back again because of how much they learned, and they do get to see the program from start to finish.
Yeah.
And what was really exciting about this was we looked at the kids a year later in the spring to see how the kids had performed, and it had impacted how they performed on the benchmark, and the results were as positive there as we had hoped. We were very pleased to see that it was carrying over.
That's great. Yeah. And so we some of the students got seeing stars, some of them got visualizing and verbalizing. And you can see the differences for folks out there in terms of what their pre-tests look like and where the weaknesses were for the students doing visualizing and verbalizing. Obviously, the focus was language comprehension and vocabulary, and we saw great gains there as well. And so rolling into year 2, really added a lot of principal look-ins, focused on lesson planning, standardizing some of the K2 implementation, increasing the hours of instruction. And I think that the opportunity for the principals to sit in on a lesson virtually and have a virtual coach watching it with them and telling them about what it was that they were seeing. It's kind of like that model of the principal look-fors, when they used to go with a guide to a classroom and observe, and they would talk back and forth. Now we could do all of that virtually, and it just made it much more fluid.
It certainly has. And I think, I really liked the principal, the whisper coaching or the look-ins. Our principals are so busy. There is just no way that they could sit in on a Seeing Stars and VV training. It's not going to happen. They have so much on their plate. So this allows them to get in there and watch a lesson. And while they're watching, they can chat about what they're seeing and have it explained to them. And I really think that was a critical, that probably had it was just, that really changed things when they really were able to get in there. When you can sit and see an upper grade student struggling with decoding what you would assume was a very basic word, it makes things real. Things get real really quick. And so that allows the principals to see the program in action, which I think probably is more effective than having them sit in the training for 4 days, because you've got to see it in action to see it.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that. Yeah, we definitely talked about how there was, I think, a moment where a secondary principal saw a student who couldn't read the word subtraction. And all of a sudden, boom, it sort of hit for them the impact that how far behind that student really was. If they can't read subtraction, they're not going to be able to do math now. So, leave the reading aside, they can't even do a math word problem or anything like that.
Exactly.
And so in year 3, we sort of saw that there was a lot more consistency across the elementary sites, tapered off a little bit of the coaching and saw some more growth in the principal leadership, refined some of that secondary implementation. So we've seen a lot of growth there. You talked earlier about aligning with the RISE standards. Had a couple of schools that are really struggling schools that went ahead and implemented kind of a whole school response to intervention model. And so all of those kids were getting some small group intervention at some point in the day.
Yes. And that was really exciting to see as well. And also our teachers, that we've had some interventionists that have returned to the classroom, and they're really putting it in their small group reading. And even when you see the changes in their scores, this was at the 2 sites that went whole school RTI with the program. When you see the changes in those kids' scores who were not necessarily receiving additional intervention, it's very exciting to see how they're growing when it's implemented, even in the small group reading instruction.
Yeah. And so one of the places that we've seen over time is sort of longitudinal growth on that universal screener that we were talking about before. And the universal screener that you all use is the iStation iSIP. And when we first started partnering back in September of 2017 and began to roll out that whole district-wide model we talked about, you and I have looked at this a lot, had almost as many students in the lowest performing tier as in the highest performing tier at the start of the year. And of course, given the universal screener, all of those students in the lowest tier in theory would then be getting some form of intervention, which is really tough from a capacity perspective, how to handle that. And it's really been heartening. And of course, we're going to miss out on this spring's scores, unfortunately, but to see over time that the number of students scoring in that highest tier has really grown. And critically, the number of students scoring in that lowest tier has really dropped precipitously. And, you know, at the start of each year, of course, we get new kindergarten students in, and so the gap narrows a little bit, but then it isn't as narrow as it was at the start, and then it starts to open back up again. And it would have been really exciting to see what the spring scores looked like this year. But we can kind of see a trend where there is that, you know, sizable gap given the improved K through 2 instruction that's happening for kids. And that makes a huge impact, obviously, for third grade on for all of those kids.
Yes, it does. And I think too, I'm so disappointed that we aren't going to have this spring data this year, because we've really worked hard in trying to integrate our Lindamood-Bell into our RISE instruction, and I feel like we would have had a significant increase. I mean, we would have continued in with the same pattern for sure. But next year.
Next year, that's right.
Forward to next year, right?
That's right. And that's maybe a good transition to talking a little bit more about, you know, where you all right now are in terms of remote learning and where you want to go to. And, you know, I know that Fort Smith, like all districts, initially responded by making sure, hey, let's make sure we can get kids fed. And then from there and set up a system of check-ins so we can make sure kids are safe. And then from there, we talked a lot about how there's so much diversity in the district, and some kids can easily get online. Other kids, it's much more challenging for. The home situation isn't such that they have that on a consistent basis. And so the district really established that they wanted as a baseline for there to be some packets that students could access in paper form, and parents could pick up along with their meals. And so as we talked about at the beginning of this, the challenge was figuring out how to make those paper packets something different than just a list of words. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you all did in creating that.
Okay. Yes, with your help, we started thinking about how we're going to do this. And like I said previously, it was very hard to wrap. I had a hard time wrapping my head around it, but we came up with it's a grid, and across the top are the components of the Seeing Stars lessons, or visualizing and verbalizing. And then each week, a day of the week, the kids, there's different activities for each day of the week in the grid. And the kids pick a row to do each day. Now, the paper packets are baseline, so we created them for the kids that were at the 2 sound level, 3 sound level, 4 sound, and all the way up. We did the same thing for visualizing and verbalizing. Our teachers when we came back from spring break, and our teachers created these grids. For the first 2 weeks, they created them in the week we came back, and now we're working for the remainder of the year. So the activities that are in there, it's not the same thing every single day, and we're still trying to touch on the components of an intervention lesson. Now, it's not the same thing as the intervention face-to-face, but it is not just reading a list of words. And so the kids can pick up the paper packets at the schools. The kids that do not have online access, can pick up a paper packet. The grids are also assigned for those kids that do have online access. The grids are assigned through either Google Classroom or another platform that the teachers are using. Yeah. The interventionist reached out to all the families and let them know that the packets were there and that their kids can pick them up either at school or they can access them online. To make the online versions a little bit more interactive, once we had the grids written, now the teachers are going back in and they are creating interactive lessons, more interactive lessons for the online versions where the kids can actually respond to the prompt, and then the teachers can listen to the kids' response once they turn the assignment in. So it's working. It's not the same, but it's working. You know, it's working.
That's great. And it's you know, yeah, it's pretty cool to see. It's like, you know, the teachers can do a little video snippet of them saying a word, and the student can check to make a response whether they said the word correctly or incorrectly, and then they can also give a video or an audio response back to the teacher about a word that's shown to them, which is really cool. And it kind of mimics, it's not live, but the teacher can figure out how it is that the student's responding and then differentiate their instruction for the next lesson based on that, which I think is really cool. And that kind of leads up to the idea of, you know, some of your teachers have really taken the leap and are doing fully online live sessions with students, and they're able to use their components of the kit, some of which we have online that they can actually use in a live session with students. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that's been going.
Yes, you know, I before we move to that, I just have to say that what our teachers have done and the things they've created and are creating, I'm just so impressed. And it's simply from the professional development and their understanding of the program that's happened over the past 3 years, that it has blown me away, the things that they've come up with. Some of our teachers were able to arrange and are still trying to arrange the live sessions with their kids. It seems that it's worked out best in a lot of cases to do it one-on-one with the kids that can have online time. But they are actually Zooming with the kids and doing a lesson, doing a regular seeing stars or visualizing and verbalizing lessons with their students. So that is exciting to see as well. And we'll be initiating the coaching with that, I think, in the next week. They are going to have access to the online coaching for those sessions.
Yeah, and it's been great to be able to do the online coaching for those sessions, and then also just to be able to meet with teachers virtually and be able to help them design some of those lessons and design some of those packets and things like that. You know, we talked about how dynamic the summer school was, and I think in year 2 we ended up working with 8 different sites or 7 different sites that you did a summer school with. And we're still hoping to do a summer school this summer. Possibly that will be in person if that's, you know, what policy is, what policy allows for. In other cases, it might be online. And so I know that it's been, again, really encouraging to see that the district is motivated to, whichever way possible, make sure that they get some summer instruction to students, to those most struggling students, even if that may end up being a virtual live online sessions that teachers are having with their kids.
Yes, we are looking at the possibility of doing a virtual summer camp. We're working together with you on looking at that. We really want to pursue something this summer because the kids have missed, you know, the last quarter of school basically. And while we've been pleased that the summer slide that we had experienced prior to using the Seeing Stars and VV programs, we don't see that as to the degree I can't tell you how many times the teachers have come back to me in September and say they haven't forgotten anything. They've still got it. It's still there. And so even though we are not seeing it like we had previously, there's still going to be a slide. And these kids need it too badly. I mean, it's so hard when you struggle to learn to read, and it makes things so difficult for them. School is not fun when you can't read. So I'm hoping that we can work something out. You know, Arkansas has not been, you know, we're kind of a rural area, rural state, so we haven't been hit as hard as the big cities. So maybe at some point we may have to not do it in June, but maybe in July. I don't know. If we can do it live, that would be the best. But if not, we'll do it virtually. And our teachers will be comfortable. I mean, like, that's the advantage. That's one of the advantage when we started talking about this, doing it virtually, is that this is something we're familiar with. We're familiar with the online coaching. We're familiar with, the kids are used to it. So while it will be different, we have kind of an edge because we're used to doing it. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Cathey, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you taking out the time. I know you've got a million things happening. So carving out some time to talk about all of this, I know is an added piece, but I think it'll be really helpful for other districts to consider some of the things that they can be doing during this period of time. So our contact information is there. If you want to reach out to Cathey directly, if you have questions or thoughts, that would be great. My contact information is there as well. We will be having some more Leaders in Literacy webinar sessions upcoming. And as I mentioned earlier, you can also check out some of the podcasts. So Cathey, thank you very much for coming on and doing this. And I really do look forward to, at some point, being able to take another trip down to Fort Smith and see you in person.
Yes. One of these days.
One of these days. Don't know when it's going to be, but one of these days.
One of these days. That's right.
All right. Thank you, Cathey.
Thank you.